Ned Stark rode south with a heavy heart, gray wind's distant howl echoing in his mind as he left the familiar white fields of the north behind. He carried with him the memory of too many grievances. He had seen good men laid into the ground, and young men not yet old enough to shave marched into battles that only promised more corpses to bury. The rebellion had waged for moons beyond count, and the entire realm reeled under the strain of bloodshed and sorrow. Yet he had no choice. He rode because honor demanded it, because Robert Baratheon, his oldest friend, had called upon him. He was committed to seeing this war through, at least that was what he told himself each morning. But with each league he ventured further south, something within him churned with doubt. He had begun the long journey under a banner of righteous vengeance. If half the rumors were true, Rhaegar Targaryen had abducted Lyanna Stark, Ned's beloved sister, and left House Stark shamed. Brandon Stark had died a needless death, and their father, Rhaegar Stark, followed soon after in a burst of wildfire at the order of King Aerys II Targaryen. Justice was the cry for House Stark and for the realm. The Mad King had sown torment and fear. The rebellion, led by Robert with unwavering fury, had become a crusade, and Ned had believed in it. He had believed in Robert. More than that, he had believed the war was just. He had marched forth under the sigil of the direwolf in confidence that the realm would be better once the Targaryens were vanquished. But wars had a way of searing away illusions. He had seen villages gutted by chaos, children cowering behind burning rubble, begging for bread or mercy or both. The stench of rotting flesh filled the wind behind every advance. Men wore vengeful smiles upon their lips as they wiped blood from their steel. Songs about glory never mentioned the heartbreak of seeing your enemy's eyes dim with death, or feeling the warm spray of a dying man's last breath. As Ned crossed through the riverlands toward the crownlands, the misery he witnessed stoked a deeper conflict in his chest. He'd taken the opportunity to speak with lords and knights, peasants and merchants, and even captured Targaryen soldiers. Rumors circulated that Rhaegar had not been the monster many believed him to be. Some said that Rhaegar had tried to reason with his father, that the prince disagreed with the king's atrocities. They whispered that the crown prince had always harbored a gentle heart, preferring music and prophecy to sadism and tyranny. Others, more cynically, insisted these were ploys spread by Targaryen loyalists to garner sympathy. Ned wanted to ignore them. He wanted to remain steadfast, to trust in Robert's cause, but doubt seeped in like water through cracks in an old fortress. The moment that doubt grew hardest to ignore was the day he discovered that Rhaegar had fathered 2 children, Rhaenys and Aegon, with Elia Martell of Dorne. Ned had seen the bones of innocence incinerated in the name of war before. He had heard that Tywin Lannister, a new and opportunistic ally of Robert's cause, might be waiting for an opportune moment to strike King's Landing, not out of principle but out of ambition. Indeed, the Lannisters had remained aloof until the tide of the war shifted, and it was rumored they intended to sack the city. What would become of those children, he wondered. Would Robert's thirst for vengeance stretch to murdering babes in their cradle because they bore the name Targaryen? Ned remembered the look in Robert's eyes whenever he spoke of the dragon spawn. "They have to die," he would say, his strong hands gripping the table's edge as if he'd strangle the children himself. No Targaryen must remain. No chance for them to rise again. Ned wondered if Robert had always been so merciless, or if the war had twisted him into a reflection of all that he hated. Once, Robert had been a man who roared with laughter, who found joy in tourneys and feasting, who had made a shy, sorrowful young heir of Winterfell feel comforted. That man had receded as the war pressed on, replaced by a single-minded warrior consumed by the demon of vengeance. Over the days, Ned found himself silent in Robert's presence, not wanting to stoke his fury or draw attention to the disquiet in his own soul. And so, by the time Ned Stark neared the outskirts of King's Landing, he was torn. He could continue riding to fulfill his oath to Robert, unleashing the final blow to House Targaryen, whatever it might look like. Or he could heed another voice inside him, telling him this had all gone too far. That voice persisted, growing stronger as the crown of the Red Keep appeared in the distance. He recalled a conversation he'd once had with Maester Luwin in the crypts of Winterfell, long before the war, about the purpose of kings and lords. They were meant to protect, preserve, and lead. Vengeance did not figure into that purpose, at least not to the extent that it would cost the lives of innocent children. If the Targaryen children were slaughtered, what difference did it make that it was done in the name of justice? Everything changed the day he met Rhaegar Targaryen's retinue fleeing the capital, disguised in worn cloaks and half-starved. They were not monstrous apparitions. They were frightened souls, the remnants of a royal family in tatters. Rhaegar herself was nowhere to be seen. Rumors said she had gone to Dragonstone with her last unborn child, or so the frightened women claimed. They traveled with a handful of loyal guards. One young guard, delirious from a wound, clutched Ned's hand and pleaded for mercy. Ned expected cunning lies, but found only the raw truth of desperation. These few had not participated in the cruelties of Aerys. They begged only to be spared from Tywin Lannister's fury if the Lannisters were to storm the city before the rebels took over. Ned promised them safety on his honor. He would not turn them away, no matter the direwolf insignia he wore. When they asked if that was not a betrayal of Robert, Ned could find no easy answer. He simply said, "I won't let you be murdered for something you did not do." The war hammered King's Landing soon after. While Robert's forces closed in, Tywin Lannister marched on the city with a great host under false pretenses of loyalty. The gates were thrown open by Grand Maester Pycelle, who urged the king to let Lord Tywin in, believing the man came to defend the capital. Proved a fatal mistake. The Lannisters sacked the city with brutal efficiency. Unchecked, they looted, killed, and ravaged. Smoke billowed over King's Landing like a black crown of devastation. Ned entered the city the next day, not entirely sure what he would find, only certain that the horrors of war were about to cross all lines of decency. He rode through the twisted alleys, seeing corpses in red pools, hearing the wails of mothers searching for children. Lannister men swaggered through the streets with golden lions on their chests, dragging spoils behind them. And it was here, in the labyrinth of fear and misery, that Ned was guided by a whispered rumor. Rhaegar Targaryen lived. The crowned prince had not perished in the Battle of the Trident, as was widely claimed. Instead, he lay grievously wounded within the Red Keep, hidden away by his loyal Kingsguard and a handful of devout retainers. Concussed and half-dead, he'd been spirited away from the battlefield before the final outcome was known. His father, the Mad King, remained in the throne room, or so Ned heard, raving about wildfire and betrayal. Word had it the king was prepared to burn the entire city if the rebels breached the walls. Ned, heart pounding with anxiety, realized that if Rhaegar was indeed alive, it could be a chance, one slim chance, to avert total bloodshed. Whether or not the rebellion was justified, whether or not Robert was in the right, the city was on the brink of a massacre. The Mad King would torch King's Landing if cornered, and Tywin's men were already turning the streets into a living nightmare. Ned found himself at a crossroads. He could ride to the Red Keep with rebel men and kill any Targaryen he found, fulfilling Robert's vengeance and ensuring no new dragon rose from these ashes. Or he could take another path, the path that his heart had been urging him to consider ever since the horrors of war exposed themselves fully. He gathered a few trusted Northmen, men who believed in Ned Stark as much as they believed in Robert Baratheon's cause. They were men who had fought beside Ned for years, men who had seen what cruelty had taken root in Tywin Lannister's approach to war, men who, like Ned, wondered if the realm might need something other than endless vengeance. In the secrecy of an abandoned courtyard, they agreed. They would find Rhaegar Targaryen and see for themselves if the Crown Prince could end this war swiftly. For who better to halt the Mad King than the heir, if that heir had reason enough to remove his own father from the throne? It was a mad notion, treasonous. Beyond treasonous, in fact, Ned was consciously betraying Robert's rebellion. And yet, as he guided his horse toward the Red Keep, he felt more sure in that moment than in all the others. He was fulfilling his vow to protect innocence. If Robert's heart had grown black with wrath, if Tywin was indulging in horrors, then Ned would find another way. Steeling himself, he slipped through the streets, always mindful of the Lannister soldiers loitering with bloodied swords in their hands. It was nighttime when Ned reached the side entrance of the Red Keep, an old postern gate once used by the Targaryens for discreet comings and goings. The city was ablaze, but a hush had fallen, as if fear itself were holding its breath, waiting to see whether Aerys would unleash wildfire upon the entire populace. 2 Northmen accompanied Ned, both anxious. Neither had illusions about how perilous this was. If discovered, they could all be cut down by Lannisters or set ablaze by Aerys. The heavy iron gate gave way, revealing corridors choked with dust and the smell of scorched tapestries. Within, the hush was even more foreboding. They heard occasional screams echo through empty halls. Several of the Targaryen guards had either fled or been cut down. Bodies in red cloaks littered the hallways, but a small number of white cloaks, the Kingsguard, still stood sentinel near a hidden chamber. Ned nearly thought they would fight to the last man, but when the Northmen approached, the Kingsguard parted as if expecting them. Ser Barristan Selmy's face was pained, sorrowful, but he lowered his blade. "He's dying," was all the legendary knight said as he looked to Ned. "If you've come to kill him, do it quickly. He's in no state to defend himself." Ned pressed his lips together and lowered his sword hand, though he was far from certain. "I've come to talk," he said quietly. "There's been enough killing." Barristan and the others exchanged glances, wariness etched in their eyes. They saw the stark sigil, recognized the rebel in front of them, but they also saw truth in Ned's face. Unspeaking, Ser Barristan stood aside and gestured for Ned to enter. Inside the dimly lit room, Rhaegar Targaryen lay on a table, stripped of armor, bandaged across his torso. He was conscious, though barely, his violet eyes fixed on Ned with surprising calm. So many images flashed across Ned's mind. He recalled the vibrant prince at Harrenhal's tourney, celebrated for his valor and skill in arms. He recalled the sense of awe that swept the crowd when Rhaegar tilted against the finest knights in the realm. Now that same prince lay near death, his once proud visage slack, the remnants of a fresh bruise marring his cheek. His silver-gold hair clung to his damp skin, the bandages around his middle soaked with blood. Ned swallowed against the lump in his throat. This was the man Robert had built an entire war around defeating. But from the look of him, Rhaegar was more a wounded man than a fearsome dragon. "You are Eddard Stark," the prince murmured. His voice, though weak, held a note of cultured dignity. "Has the city fallen?" Ned hesitated. "The Lannisters have sacked it," he said at length. "Robert is near. The Mad King, your father, still holds the throne room, though I can't say for how long. He may burn the entire city. I've come to ask if you can stop him." A bitter smile twisted Rhaegar's lips. "He is beyond stopping. I tried. But if he still lives, that means he's plotting to burn them all." His gaze flicked across the room, as though taking stock of the white cloaks and the Northmen. I wanted to be king for the sake of the realm, not like this." "Then help me stop him," Ned pressed. "Order your men to stand down or to stand against him, because if you don't, the city is lost, and the Targaryen line is finished. Robert means to kill your children." Anguish flickered in Rhaegar's eyes. "Aegon," he croaked. "And Rhaenys, where are they?" Ned searched the room, looking at the Kingsguard. Ser Barristan shook his head mournfully. "They were in Maegor's holdfast, your grace, with their mother, Princess Elia. I do not know if they escaped. I fear the Lannisters." His voice trailed off, and the horror in his eyes spoke the rest. For a moment, Rhaegar closed his eyes. Silence hung, pregnant with sorrow. Ned felt the ache in his own heart, remembering the children he had seen in the path of war. Could he truly allow 2 more innocents to die? No, he would not. He would not let that evil happen. And so he drew a deep breath. "I am here, Prince Rhaegar, to make a choice that might save your children. But it means you must help me. I need your word that if we end your father's reign, you will bend and see that this killing is stopped. I can't promise Robert won't call for your head, but he wants the throne," Rhaegar interrupted, his voice bitter. "He'll kill me. You realize that, "Don't you, Stark?" Ned refused to flinch. "If we can show there is another way, if we can force him into a truce, we might find a path. But the truth is, Robert's wrath is beyond words. I cannot guarantee your safety, but I can try to protect your children. Let me see if a peace can be brokered." Rhaegar exhaled, coughed, wincing at the pain in his side. For a moment, Ned thought the prince would refuse, would call them all traitors and rally the Kingsguard for one last, desperate stand. But Rhaegar only gave a ghost of a nod. "I will do what I can. Ser Barristan, those still loyal to me, if there are any left, must stand with Lord Stark to remove my father from the throne, peacefully if at all possible. Spare who you can. The city's seen enough blood." Ser Barristan bowed his head, a mixture of shame and determination in his eyes. "We will do our duty." So began the impossible alliance. Eddard Stark, champion of the rebellion, joined forces with the wounded crown prince and the honorable fraction of the Kingsguard in a final bid to save King's Landing from the madness of Aerys. They navigated winding corridors, the flicker of torches throwing strange shadows against the walls. At each turn, Ned expected to encounter Lannisters with red hands or Targaryen loyalists who would kill them all. Yet somehow, guided by the Kingsguard's knowledge of hidden paths, they made their way to the throne room. When they arrived, the great doors were barred from within. The muffled voice of Aerys echoed, shrill with mania. Ned caught words that made his skin crawl: wildfire, traitors, burn them all. Fear nipped at his composure. If the Mad King ignited caches of wildfire that were rumored to be beneath the city, no one would survive, rebellion or Targaryen alike. Over 500,000 souls could perish in green flame, their ashes drifting over the rubble of King's Landing. They forced the doors open, and chaos erupted. A handful of gold-cloaked guards loyal to the king rushed forward. The Kingsguard with Ned engaged them. Swords rang, and men screamed. The Mad King stood at the base of the Iron Throne, hair disheveled, eyes blazing with a fanatic gleam. Near him stood Rossart, the pyromancer, robed in black and green. They held jars of wildfire, ready to set alight the entire keep with a single spark. At the sight of Rhaegar, battered but alive, Aerys' face contorted in fury. Spittle flecked his lips. "Traitor! Traitor! You conspire with the wolves? You would betray your king? Burn them all, Rossart! Burn them!" His voice climbed higher, an unhinged wail. Ned saw the pyromancer hesitate, glancing between Rhaegar and the king. Barristan Selmy lunged, cutting down the first of Aerys' guards who rushed to intercept. In the confusion, Rossart made a desperate move to ignite the jars. Ned hurled his sword at the man's arm. The blow landed, sending the jar tumbling away from the flame. The wildfire splashed across the marble floor in a lurid green spatter, but it did not ignite fully. Rossart cried out, clutching his gashed arm. Another of Ned's men tackled him to the ground. The Mad King screamed anew, reaching for a hidden dagger, but Rhaegar, surprising everyone, stumbled forward, gripping his father's wrist despite his own injuries. Aerys hissed and tried to pull away, but the prince's grip tightened with righteous fury. "Father, no more," Rhaegar choked. "No more burning. No more death." For one tense heartbeat, Ned thought the Mad King might slip free or stab his son. But Ser Jaime Lannister, unexpectedly emerging from behind the throne, already bloodied from some earlier clash, stepped forward. He saw the dagger and swiftly ran his sword through Aerys. The Mad King's eyes bulged in shock, and blood gushed from his mouth. Rhaegar jerked back, dropping his father's body, which collapsed onto the marble floor with a sickening thud. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breaths of the living. Aerys Targaryen lay dead, killed by his own Kingsguard. Rossart groaned on the ground, pinned by 2 Northmen. The jars of wildfire scattered, unlit. Slowly, Rhaegar straightened, his face pale and haunted. His eyes flicked to Ned, who stood panting, sword in hand. Then, just as quickly, Rhaegar's gaze swept the room, pausing on Jaime Lannister. Jaime stared back, his face twisted with the shock of what he had done. not quite believing he had just stabbed his king. The hush was deafening. It was then that one of Ned's Northmen returned from a far corridor, calling out in a grim voice, "Lord Stark, we found Princess Elia. She's badly wounded. Her children, the Lannisters." He couldn't finish. It was enough. They'd found Rhaenys dead, and Aegon was missing. The mother had been hurt defending them. Whether Aegon was taken or murdered outright, no one knew. Elia was delirious, calling for her son. Sorrow gnawed at Ned's insides, and he closed his eyes. Rhaegar's mouth opened, but no sound came. Tears brimmed. Barristan placed a comforting hand on the prince's shoulder. They had saved the city from wildfire, but the cost was immeasurable. And it wasn't over yet. Robert Baratheon would arrive, and if he found Rhaegar alive, found Targaryens alive, blood would spill again. Ned shuddered, recalling Robert's vow to see the dragon line ended. Yet, in that moment of gloom, Ned Stark made a decision. He had not come this far, had not betrayed everything he once stood for, only to watch more children die. It was time to negotiate a peace that would require every last shred of his honor. Kneeling beside Rhaegar, he spoke in a low, urgent tone. "We must find a way to end this now, or Robert will kill everyone with Targaryen blood, including you, your grace, if you remain. Let me talk to him. Let me see if I can bring him reason." Rhaegar swallowed, eyes distant. "I have nothing left, Stark. My father is dead by my own guard's sword. My daughter is gone. My son, where is my son?" Barristan looked away, face torn. "I can't be king. There is no kingdom left for me." His breath caught in a trembling gasp. "Yet, if it means my people can be spared, if it means there will be no more war, I will do whatever you ask." Ned placed a hand lightly on Rhaegar's shoulder, uncertain how to comfort a man who had lost so much. "We will find a way. The realm cannot afford more slaughter. We must try." They carried Rhaegar from the throne room. Jaime Lannister stayed behind, a haunted look in his eyes, uncertain what would become of him after killing the king he was sworn to protect. Ned looked at the young lion but said nothing. There would be a time to address that action later. For now, the city was still smoldering, and Robert's army was not far away. Ned only prayed that Robert would at least give him a chance to speak before raising his warhammer. Outside the Red Keep, chaos reigned. Fires raged in pockets of the city, stoked by looters or stray sparks. Bands of soldiers roamed, some trying to extinguish flames, others thirsting for more violence. Citizens hid in their homes or cowered in alleyways. Ned sent out riders bearing messages, urging an end to the sack, but whether the Lannisters would pay any heed was uncertain. All Ned could do was keep Rhaegar hidden, the once proud prince now forced to conceal himself in the very city that had feared his father. In the early hours of the next morning, Robert Baratheon arrived. His host filled the battered gates of King's Landing. Ned went out to meet him in the courtyard. Robert was a sight. Tall, broad, clad in battered armor, a wolf pelt from the trident draped over his shoulders. His face was set in a grim line, and the rage in his eyes flared upon seeing Ned approach without a single Targaryen head to present. "Gods, Ned, what is this?" Robert roared, dismounting his warhorse with a heavy thud. "I expected to find the dragon scum stacked like cordwood, not the city in the hands of Lannisters, and you standing here as though you'd lost your wits." Ned took in his old friend's scowl. Around them, the men parted, uncertain. The aura of tension was thick enough to choke on. "Robert," Ned began slowly, "Tywin Lannister's men have done unspeakable things here. They sacked the city in your name, but I doubt they did it for you. The king is dead. Aerys was slain in the throne room." Robert's scowl deepened, though a flicker of satisfaction crossed his face at the mention of Aerys' death. "Good. That's one Targaryen less. Where's Rhaegar? Tell me you gutted him like a trout." Ned steadied himself. "He's alive, Robert." In the hush that followed, the wind seemed to whistle through the blackened ruins. "Alive," Robert repeated, voice low. His enormous hands tightened around his warhammer's handle. "You let him live?" Ned raised his chin, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. "Listen to me. The Mad King tried to burn the city with wildfire. Rhaegar helped me stop him. If not for that, King's Landing would be ashes now. He is grievously wounded. He has no taste for further war. Robert, we can end this without more bloodshed." Robert stared in disbelief, then let out a bark of a laugh, an ugly, hollow sound. "End this? Ned, you forget yourself. The Targaryens burned your father and brother. That snake took your sister. He would have destroyed us all if I hadn't smashed him at the trident. By the gods, why would you spare him?" Ned braced against the urge to back down. "For the realm, Robert. Look at what's happened here. Tywin's men have slaughtered innocents, murdered a child, Rhaegar's daughter. If we keep going down this path, the name of House Baratheon will be spat upon by every corner of Westeros. You will sit the Iron Throne. No one disputes you've won. But at what cost if you kill every last Targaryen, including babes?" Robert's brow twitched. "Babes grow up to be dragons, and dragons always come back for vengeance." Ned felt anger and despair war within him. "Then what are we? We become no better than Ares, Robert. The entire realm has seen enough horror. House Stark will not stand for butchering children. If you do this, I cannot stand by you." There it was, the betrayal laid bare. Robert looked at Ned as though he were a stranger. Their friendship, their brotherhood forged in years of closeness, seemed to teeter on a razor's edge. Around them, men shifted, uncertain if they should raise arms. Finally, Robert growled, "You dare defy me? After all we've been through?" Ned held his gaze firmly. "I would defy anyone who murders children in cold blood. I have come here to broker peace. Let Rhaegar live in exile if you must. Spare his blood, spare his children, if any remain alive. Let the realm see that this new king you would be is not a monster. It's the only way to truly win this war." For a heartbeat, Ned feared Robert might simply strike him down. The look in the Baratheon's eyes was wild. But Robert was not the Mad King. He was still Robert, beneath the anger and heartbreak. He turned away, exhaling a furious breath. "This is madness," he whispered. "You know how many good men died because of that family?" Ned nodded gravely. "I do, but more will die if we continue. House Martell is already enraged by the ruin to Elia. The reach is uncertain. The Stormlands are battered. The North is weary of war. Do you want to begin your reign with more blood? Or do you want to be hailed as a merciful king who ended the madness?" Robert said nothing, letting the hush stretch out. At last, he relented, glowering at Ned with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. "You've grown too soft, Ned. Damn it all, but I won't have the realm call me a butcher. Show me this princeling, so I can see for myself if he truly yields." Ned led Robert and a small retinue to the hidden chamber where Rhaegar was kept. Tension coiled in the air as they arrived. Barristan Selmy stood at Rhaegar's side, and he did not rise when Robert entered. Rhaegar, weak and hollow-cheeked, looked at the man who had been his mortal enemy. Robert Baratheon, the usurper, the man who had believed Rhaegar abducted Lyanna. Rhaegar's eyes flickered with some unreadable emotion, but he did not speak until Robert stood directly over him. If Robert felt any pity at the sight of Rhaegar's wounded state, he kept it hidden. His warhammer hovered near, as though ready to end this in an instant. "If you've any last words, Targaryen, say them," Robert muttered, uncertain whether he would spare the man or not. Rhaegar lifted his gaze. "The war is over. You have what you wanted. My father is dead. The throne is yours. If it will save my son, I'll surrender. Exile me, imprison me. Do what you will, but end the slaughter." Robert's knuckles turned white on his weapon's haft. "Your son might already be dead," he spat. "Your daughter is dead. Did you consider that? Did you consider the cost of your father's madness?" Rhaegar's voice faltered. I tried to prevent it. I failed." He closed his eyes, and a tremor went through him. "If Aegon still breathes, keep him safe. Let him live. Show mercy." In the torchlight, Robert's rage played across his face. He wanted to strike. Vengeance sang in his blood. But Ned stood behind him, the presence of loyal Northmen around them. Ser Barristan stood ready to defend his prince, though he was only one man. A hush carried through the chamber, and in that silence, Robert wrestled with the man he had become and the man he once was. At last, he exhaled a bitter laugh. "I never thought I'd see you broken like this." Silence followed. He looked to Ned. "Fine," he said, the word a growl. "I won't kill him, but I want the realm to see him brought low. The Targaryens are done. Rhaegar will renounce all claims. He will be sent across the narrow sea, and if he or his children ever set foot on Westerosi soil again." Robert hefted his warhammer for emphasis. Ned allowed himself a single breath of relief. It was not the kindest fate, but it was life. The realm would not suffer further if Robert's will held. In that moment, a fragile peace took shape. Word spread quickly. Rhaegar Targaryen had yielded to King Robert Baratheon, who had claimed the Iron Throne. The Lannisters, seeing Robert's acceptance of the surrender, scaled back their atrocities, although the damage was already done. Princess Elia Martell hovered near death in a maester's care. Little Rhaenys was confirmed dead, but a rumor persisted that baby Aegon had been carried off by a Lannister knight. No one knew his fate. The Martells of Dorne seethed at the violation of Elia and the murder of her daughter, but for the moment, they had no recourse but to wait and see how the new king would handle justice. The cost of the conflict was immense, yet the war had ended, thanks in no small part to Eddard Stark's daring choice. It was not the end of the turmoil, however. Suspicion lingered. Some of Robert's men grumbled about the Targaryens not being completely eradicated. Others whispered that Ned Stark was a traitor, conspiring with dragons. But Robert, for reasons of his own, would not let Ned be dishonored publicly. Too many lords revered Ned Stark's integrity. Too many had seen or heard of the city's near destruction by wildfire. In time, Robert recognized that winning the love of the realm required a gentler hand, at least in appearance. So he hammered out terms of a new order. Rhaegar was to be stripped of all titles. Any Targaryen strongholds or possessions would be seized by the crown. On a predetermined day, Rhaegar would be escorted to a ship bound for Essos, his future uncertain. The Targaryen claim to the throne would be declared null, thereby legitimizing Robert's rule. Targaryen loyalists either bent the knee or fled into exile. The greatest fear was that the Martells would revolt, but Ned, feeling a responsibility for the peace he had negotiated, traveled to Dorne to negotiate with Prince Doran Martell, ensuring some measure of justice and compensation for the horrors inflicted on Elia. That was a separate, complicated matter. As the weeks passed, King's Landing reeled from the aftermath of war. Bodies were buried, ruin was cleared, and the business of coronation loomed. Robert had captured the throne by conquest, and already courtiers jockeyed for position. One quiet morning, Ned stood in the courtyard of the Red Keep, watching as Rhaegar Targaryen was helped onto a horse-drawn litter. Rhaegar was still weak, though recovering slowly. Barristan Selmy accompanied him, having asked Robert for permission to see the prince safely into exile. Robert, in one of his rare moments of magnanimity, had granted it, as long as Barristan returned in a year to serve the new king or relinquish his white cloak. When Ned approached, Rhaegar offered him a wan smile. "Lord Stark," he said softly, "I do not know how to thank you for sparing my life, though I can never repay you for the loss your family suffered." Ned bowed his head. "There is nothing to thank me for. Many lives were lost on all sides, Prince Rhaegar. I only hope that what I did will prevent more bloodshed." Rhaegar's gaze drifted beyond the walls, as if searching for the ghosts of his children. "I pray so. Farewell, Stark. May the realm know peace now." They parted without ceremony, and Ned watched as the small procession departed through the gates, heading for the ship that would carry Rhaegar to exile across the narrow sea. After the departure, Ned's position at court was tenuous. He had saved the city from wildfire, but some lords grumbled that he had overstepped by sparing Rhaegar. Stannis Baratheon in particular raised an eyebrow, though he kept his counsel. Tywin Lannister had expected the new king to reward him lavishly, but Robert, having seen the atrocities Tywin's men committed, remained guarded. Cersei Lannister was offered as a bride to Robert, a match that Tywin pushed vigorously. Robert, battered by the war, found little reason to refuse. Yet the tension between the new king and House Lannister was palpable. Ned considered returning to Winterfell. He had no desire to remain in King's Landing, full of intrigue and fresh hatreds. But Robert insisted he stay for the coronation, insisted he stand by his side. Their friendship had been tested, nearly broken, yet Robert clung to the memory of simpler days. "I need you here, Ned," he said. "If you leave, all these vultures will peck me to death. You're the only man I trust." So Ned stayed, for a time, to honor their bond, though he could feel Winterfell calling him home like a distant echo in the snow. At the coronation, Robert Baratheon was crowned king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm. The great lords gathered to pay homage, though many wore forced smiles. In the crowd, Ned saw Oberyn Martell, face like carved stone. The Red Viper's eyes bore into Robert as though measuring how best to kill him for what had been done to Elia and her children. The Martells did not bend easily, and Ned wondered if the seeds of vengeance had merely been planted in the desert sands. Nonetheless, for now, the war was officially over. Robert's rebellion had triumphed without fully exterminating the Targaryen line. Whispers spread that on Dragonstone, Queen Rhaella had given birth to another child, Daenerys Targaryen, in the midst of a terrible storm. No one knew what that meant for the future. For the moment, Robert's hold on power felt secure, but cracks spread beneath the surface. The realm was not the same as it had been. Neither was Ned Stark. In the months that followed, Ned worked tirelessly to bring some measure of justice for House Martell, forging uneasy alliances and talking sense into a vengeful realm. He secured from Robert a promise that those who committed the murder of Rhaenys and the possible abduction or murder of Aegon would be punished, if they could be identified. Tywin swore his men had acted outside his commands, a lie so transparent that only Robert's precarious need for stability kept the crown from calling the Lannister lord to account fully. The best Ned could do was arrange that a royal inquiry be held. It appeased Dorne enough to forestall outright revolt, though the Martells seethed. Yet every step Ned took felt like walking on a knife's edge. He saw the hungry look in the eyes of courtiers who recognized the power vacuum around Robert's unsettled court. He saw the Lannisters consolidating influence, pressing Robert to reward them for their timely aid in taking King's Landing. The Tyrells, too, vied for recognition after bending the knee. With each passing day, Ned's longing for the cold honesty of Winterfell grew stronger. Court politics were a labyrinth he had never desired to navigate. At long last, when the city began to stabilize, Ned approached Robert to request leave to return north. He found the new king in a solar, poring over the realm's finances, an ordeal Robert plainly hated. "Leaving already?" Robert said gruffly, as if half expecting Ned to remain in King's Landing forever. Ned inclined his head. "I've done what I can. The realm needs a king's hand to guide it now, not an endless war. You have your victory, Robert. It's time I return home to Winterfell." Robert paused, looking at him with a hint of sorrow beneath his stern veneer. "We were supposed to build this new world together, Ned. I had visions, you and me making the realm right, but everything's not as I imagined." Ned managed a small smile. "It never is, Robert. You're king now, and you'll do great things, I hope. But the North needs its lord, and I am tired of seeing blood spilled. Let me go home. If you have need of me, send word." For a long moment, Robert's face softened into something like the friend Ned had once known. Rambunctious, with a ready grin, he clasped Ned's shoulder. "Go then, but by the gods, don't stay away forever. I'll try not to ruin everything while you're gone." He laughed, though it sounded hollow. The next morning, Ned Stark departed King's Landing with a modest retinue of Northmen. The city still bore the scars of sacking, charred ruins, broken walls, and haunted faces. But the streets no longer ran red with blood, and the threat of wildfire had passed. The Targaryen banners were gone, replaced by the crowned stag of House Baratheon. Ned rode through the city gates, thinking on all that had transpired. The moment he first chose to spare Rhaegar, the night they wrested the city from the Mad King, the confrontation with Robert. He had betrayed the rebellion's initial aim, complete annihilation of House Targaryen, and instead chosen a fragile peace. Yet he felt no regret. Honor was not always clean or simple, and if sparing the life of Rhaegar meant fewer innocents died, then Ned would bear the accusation of treason from those who saw only black and white. Word traveled over the next year that Rhaegar Targaryen had recovered somewhat from his wounds, only to sail from one free city to another, never lingering in one place long. Rumors said he gathered loyalists, or that he quietly mourned his lost children, or that he might join a company of exiled knights. Some swore they saw him in Bravos, others in Lys or Volantis. No one knew for certain, and Robert forbade him from returning. Meanwhile, across the sea on Dragonstone, the infant Daenerys Targaryen grew under the guardianship of a few loyal retainers. Another rumor suggested that Viserys, the older prince who had fled with Queen Rhaella, now styled himself the rightful king in exile, though few in Westeros took the boy seriously. The Targaryen line endured, if only barely. In time, the realm settled into a semblance of peace under King Robert Baratheon. Marriages were arranged, alliances forged, and the common folk prayed that the horrors of civil war would not return. But in the shadows, resentments festered. The Martells nursed hatred for what had been done to Elia and her children. Some Targaryen loyalists whispered of a day when the dragon would rise again. The seeds of future conflict lay dormant, needing only a spark to reignite them. Far away from King's Landing, Eddard Stark walked the ancient halls of Winterfell once more. He oversaw the harvest, the training of new guards, the daily concerns of the North. He took a bride, Catelyn Tully, as had been arranged before the war. She brought him comfort and an alliance with the Riverlands. He found joy in fatherhood. Yet in quiet moments, the ghosts of the war haunted him. He would recall Rhaegar's defeated eyes, Robert's near uncontrollable fury, the smell of wildfire in the throne room. He had done what he believed was right, but the realm's memory was long, and peace was always more fragile than it seemed. Seasons turned. Robert's rule endured, though overshadowed by lavish spending, tourneys, and the subtle manipulations of courtiers. Tywin Lannister established his house as indispensable to the crown's coffers. The small council gained new members, each with private agendas. Varys, the spider, spun his webs of whispers. Littlefinger, the master of coin, found opportunity in chaos. None forgot that once, Eddard Stark had stood between Robert and vengeance, forging a path for a Targaryen prince to live. To some, that made Ned a hero. To others, a traitor. In taverns and inns across the Seven Kingdoms, men told tales of the rebellion, how Robert killed Rhaegar on the Trident, except that now the tale had changed. More discerning tongues spoke of how Rhaegar lived, exiled, rumored to be a broken man who wandered Essos singing mournful songs. Others insisted that was nonsense, that Robert had bested him in single combat, but the prince's body was whisked away by sorcerers, and he survived by dark magic. Conspiracy theories abounded, yet the truth was simpler. Ned Stark had offered mercy, and Robert had grudgingly accepted. The realm moved on, but that single choice reverberated through history. The children of Ned Stark grew up hearing bits and pieces of their father's role in the war. Sansa and Arya, both so different, asked about the Targaryens with wide eyes. Robb, the heir, wanted to know if dragons would ever threaten the North again. Ned spoke to them gently of the cost of war, of the importance of protecting the innocent, no matter their lineage. He never glorified the rebellion or the battles he had fought, always mindful of the terrible price. And when they asked why King Robert sat the throne and not someone else, Ned carefully explained that sometimes wars were not decided by who had the rightful claim, but by who had the greater force and the fleeting willingness to show mercy. Over time, Robert would visit Winterfell, though less frequently. On one such visit, years later, Robert and Ned walked in the Godswood under the watchful branches of the Heart Tree. The wind carried the faint scent of pine. Robert, by then, had grown heavier, the girth of his belly hinting at too many feasts and too little sword practice. He breathed heavily as they strolled among the ancient weirwoods. "I sometimes wonder, Ned," Robert murmured, "what might have happened if you hadn't found Rhaegar that night, if you'd killed him or if Tywin had beaten you to it. Maybe it would have spared us the rumors that he might come back." He ran a hand through his thick, dark hair, streaked with the first hints of gray. "But I also remember the city, how close it was to burning. Perhaps we would have all been ashes." Ned nodded silently, his gaze resting on the red leaves of the weirwood. "We saved who we could," he said simply. "We failed to save many, but what's done is done. The realm is at peace now, however tenuous. That's all we can ask for." Robert frowned, as if discontented by Ned's calm acceptance. "Peace," he scoffed gently. "A fine word, but the realm is full of vipers and vultures, Ned. You know that as well as I. And the Targaryens, they're not gone. Viserys is out there somewhere, the little babe Daenerys too, and Rhaegar, he might still raise a banner, or someone else might raise it for him." He shook his head. "I won't have that. If they cross the sea, I'll finish it once and for all." Ned felt a pang of the old tension. "Let us hope it never comes to that," he said quietly, because he knew that Robert was not the same man he once admired. Vengeance still lingered in him like a lingering flame, waiting for a gust of wind to roar back to life. Ned wondered if perhaps no war truly ended, but merely paused between storms. And yet, in those quiet years, the 7 kingdoms rebuilt. Harvests improved, trade routes reopened, and the ravages of war receded like old scars. Houses turned to their own squabbles, and new alliances were forged. The Lannisters, Baratheons, Tyrells, Martells, and Starks all circled each other in the great Game of Thrones. Ned Stark governed the North with a fair hand and a somber heart, and the small folk whispered that House Stark was the realm's moral compass. Many believed that if ever the realm fell into darkness again, the North would rise to defend it. As for Rhaegar Targaryen, stories trickled in from the east. Some said he died of a fever in Lys, cursing his fate. Others claimed he joined a group of traveling bards, singing sad ballads of the Summerhall tragedy and the passing of kings. A few insisted he secretly gathered an army of sellswords, though no sign of such a host ever crossed the narrow sea. In truth, no one could say for certain. Perhaps he was content to let the memory of the Dragon Prince fade into obscurity. Or perhaps he was still waiting for his chance to return. Ned often contemplated the fragility of the peace he had carved out that night in King's Landing. He knew some called him Oathbreaker, some cursed him for betraying Robert's vengeance. He also knew others praised him for saving the city from wildfire, for sparing countless innocents. The truth, he realized, was that every choice in war bore a cost, and no one escaped guiltless. All a man could do was follow his conscience. And Ned Stark's conscience had guided him that night to spare Rhaegar Targaryen and seek an end to the killing. That single decision rippled forward in time. Dorne stood watchful, uncertain, yet not in open rebellion. The Targaryen scions lingered in exile, a living threat to Robert's legitimacy, but not one he could easily stamp out without crossing the sea. King's Landing recovered from fire and blood. The rebellion, once a clarion call for justice, became a cautionary tale of how quickly war could lead to ruin. And though some might have said Ned's betrayal tarnished the rebellion, others observed that if Ned had not intervened, the city might have burned along with thousands of innocents. Robert's name might have been cursed rather than celebrated. As the years went on, Ned maintained a civil, though increasingly distant, relationship with Robert. The king's appetites grew, and his court became a den of intrigue. Still, the realm knew relative peace. It was not a perfect peace, for the seeds of future strife remained. But it was a peace that gave the small folk time to breathe, to plant their crops, and to raise their children without the immediate threat of war. To Ned, that was worth more than any crown. And so life continued, a precarious balance between old wounds and new hopes. In the heart of the North, Ned Stark carried the memory of a starry night when he made the impossible choice to spare his enemy. That memory shaped who he was and what the realm might yet become. Perhaps the Targaryens, scattered and disgraced, would never again claim the throne. Perhaps they would return in fire and blood. Perhaps the realm would remember mercy, or perhaps old hatreds would flare anew. There was no telling what tomorrow's storms might bring. But for one span of years, the realm was spared the worst horrors of unbridled vengeance, because Eddard Stark had chosen, in the crucible of war, to find another path. And if, on some quiet mornings, a raven came bearing rumors from across the sea, whispers of a silver-haired man glimpsed in a Braavosi temple, or a silver-haired girl sailing on a merchant ship, Ned Stark would read the message, fold it away, and gaze out across the snowy courtyard. The dire wolves of Winterfell would howl, their calls echoing through the godswood. Winter was always coming, but so too, perhaps, was another season of renewal. In the end, all Ned could do was stand by his choice, ready for whatever new dawn or new darkness that choice had wrought. In the weeks following Rhaegar Targaryen's departure from King's Landing, an unsettling quiet settled over the realm. The streets of the capital still lay scarred from the sack, and the populace shuffled through half-burned squares, clearing rubble and burying the dead. Smoke-stained walls and collapsed roofs reminded every passerby of how close they had come to utter destruction. Robert Baratheon, newly crowned, found himself surrounded by half-welcome sycophants and grim lords who eyed him warily, uncertain whether his thirst for vengeance had truly been slaked. Yet he issued decrees that the city must be rebuilt, that the war's ravages be undone as best as possible, and for a time, the horrors of the final weeks of the rebellion began to fade from immediate sight. Eddard Stark's departure made the city feel emptier to those who had placed their trust in the quiet honor of the man from the north. Though he had weathered accusations of treachery, some men said he had too soft a heart to see the war through to its logical end. His rescue of King's Landing from wildfire burnished his reputation among many in the common folk. They spoke of him in hushed tones, calling him the only lord who remembered what was just in the midst of chaos. For them, it was a small comfort to imagine that at least one man of principle had stood between them and the madness of two kings. The Mad King who would have burned them all, and the new king who might have indulged Tywin Lannister's method of total annihilation. As Ned traveled north, he felt each passing league lighten the burdens that had accumulated in his heart. The Riverlands, though scarred by battles, still brimmed with the natural beauty of autumn leaves and rolling hills. Roose Bolton had already led his own retinue back to the Dreadfort, but Ned met other northern lords along the way, Karstarks, Umbers, Mormonts, returning to their seats. Sometimes, in the evenings when they camped by a riverside, these lords would gather around Ned's small fire, murmuring dissatisfaction at how Robert's war had truly ended. Some questioned whether the Targaryens would nurse ambitions across the sea. Others lamented that Tywin Lannister had emerged from the conflict more powerful than ever, poised like a golden lion surveying a new kingdom ripe for the picking. They asked Ned if he trusted this new peace to hold. Ned always answered cautiously. "The realm is weary of war," he would say, "and King Robert wants above all else to celebrate his victory and move on. Men who are bone-tired of battle often do not look for new ones. Let us hope that is enough." But inside, he remained uneasy, recalling the last conversation he'd had with Robert in the Red Keep's courtyard. His old friend's eyes had shone with longing for the days when war seemed glorious, when it was about the just slaying the unjust. Robert's final acceptance of Rhaegar's surrender had not come from pure mercy, but from a weariness in body and spirit. Ned understood that he had cornered Robert with moral arguments and the threat of losing the North's allegiance. Robert had relented, but it had left a sour taste in the new king's mouth. Still, the road carried Ned onward, and the north beckoned. The chill in the air grew crisper as he crossed the neck. At Moat Cailin, battered towers rose in stony silence, guarding the approach to the north. The bogs and swamps around the fortress, treacherous and thick, gave Ned a sense of security that he had not felt in the south. No grand army would storm the north easily, no matter how great their ambitions. And so he pressed on, dreaming of Winterfell's towering walls and the comforting hush of its godswood. At last he arrived, the gray granite ramparts of Winterfell appearing before him on a morning so clear he could see the high keep from miles away. Men on the battlements recognized his standard and threw open the gates. Stable boys rushed to take the horses, and the courtyard soon filled with the clamor of men returning from war. Some stoic, some cheerfully greeting old friends, all relieved to be home. Ned swung down from his horse and, for a moment, closed his eyes to breathe the cold, clean air that smelled of pine and frozen earth. This was his home, not the crowded sprawl of King's Landing. Within hours of returning, he met with Maester Luwin to discuss how the North had fared in his absence. Though House Stark's banners had been called during the rebellion, the North had not suffered the same devastation as the South. Minimal raiding had occurred near the neck, but for the most part, their homeland stood strong. The harvest had been modest but enough to see them through winter if rationed properly. Luwin also delivered messages from the Lords of the North, many of whom offered relief supplies for war or asked when the next Great Council in Winterfell would be held. Ned listened carefully, thankful for the unwavering loyalty of his bannermen. Days turned into weeks, and Ned settled back into the rhythms of governance. He spoke with stewards about the finances of Winterfell, oversaw the training of new guardsmen in the courtyard, and walked the ramparts at sunrise. The war no longer hammered at his door, yet the memories lingered, pressing in at odd moments. He would pause, watching young squires practicing with wooden swords, and recall the bodies of children in King's Landing. He would recall the half-crazed look in Robert's eyes when he demanded Targaryen blood. He seldom spoke of Rhaegar, but when he did, it was in carefully chosen words. He never recounted the exact moment they stood side by side in the throne room, with the Mad King's body at their feet. He never revealed how that choice had haunted him every night since. Instead, he told those who asked only that Rhaegar had yielded, that the realm could ill afford more death, and that King Robert had agreed. It was enough of an explanation for now. Word reached him that Robert's coronation festivities had continued in grand style, financed largely by House Lannister. Tywin Lannister had paraded his men through the capital, seeking to wash away the stench of their brutal sack by showering gold around the city. The common folk, desperate for bread and coin, welcomed the infusion, though many older citizens still spat at the mention of Lannister ruthlessness. Robert had agreed to marry Cersei Lannister not long after. Their wedding was rumored to be a lavish affair, eclipsing even the sumptuous spectacles of Targaryen rule. Courtiers whispered that it signaled a new era. Baratheon might on the throne, but Lannister gold now financed the kingdom. When Ned heard those tidings from a raven's message, a heaviness took root in his chest. He feared for Robert's judgment under Tywin's looming shadow, feared that the new king would be inexorably shaped by the Lannisters' wealth and cunning. But what could Ned do? He was hundreds of leagues away, ruling the North, and Robert's invitation to serve on the small council had never been repeated. Ned sensed Robert wanted him near, but also resented how Ned had stayed his hand regarding Rhaegar. Ultimately, it seemed more comfortable for Robert to let Ned remain in Winterfell, out of immediate sight but still bound by old friendship. The year rolled on. Ned went to Riverrun to fulfill the betrothal that had been arranged before the war. He married Catelyn Tully, sealing an alliance with the Riverlands. Their union brought him a measure of quiet joy he had not expected in the wake of tragedy. With Catelyn at his side, Winterfell felt more like the home it should be, a place where the next generation of Starks would grow. Not long after, Catelyn bore him a son, Robb, named for the friend-turned-king who had once laughed so freely in the halls of the Eyrie. Ned held the tiny babe and silently prayed that the realm into which Robb Stark was born would not see the kind of horrors Ned had witnessed. Seasons passed. Word came of minor skirmishes in the Vale, petty disputes in the Reach, but overall the realm was at peace. Any scattered Targaryen loyalists who still refused to bend the knee had either fled or kept so quiet that they posed no threat to Robert's reign. Some claimed that Rhaegar dwelled in Bravos, wandering through the alleys with a hood pulled low. Others said he had died of heartbreak. No one knew for certain. King Robert never launched a full-scale manhunt, perhaps unwilling to see gold spent chasing a rumor, or perhaps unwilling to mar the image of his new reign with further warfare. As for the infant Daenerys, born on Dragonstone, she was believed to have crossed the narrow sea along with her brother Viserys after the queen's death. They were living as paupers or princelings, depending on which story one believed. Now and then, lords in the north asked Ned if the Targaryens remained a threat. "Isn't the blood of the dragon dangerous, my lord?" they would say. Ned would answer, So are resentful lords in the west, or rebellious raiders in the east, or even the shadows in the far north. We have many threats in this world. If the Targaryens wish to return in violence, we shall be ready. Otherwise, we have peace. Let us not rush to break it. Secretly, Ned would recall Robert's vow that if any Targaryen set foot on Westerosi soil again, he would finish what he started. Ned prayed that day would never come, for he had tasted enough blood for a lifetime. In time, each great house resumed the ancient cycle of marriages, feuds, and alliances. House Greyjoy, ever proud and bristling with ambition, grumbled under the new order. Balon Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands, began to speak with increasing ferocity about the old ways and the iron price. Whispers reached Ned's ears that the Ironborn might soon revolt, testing Robert's strength. When a distant cousin wrote from the coastal towns in the north that Ironborn raiders had become bolder, Ned dispatched a warning to King's Landing and reinforced the garrisons along the stony shore. Robert responded with a dismissive letter, thick with bravado. "If Balon Greyjoy dares rise against me, I'll smash him down as I did the dragons." Still, the king's small council quietly prepared for a naval conflict. Stannis Baratheon, Robert's younger brother, commanded the royal fleet from Dragonstone, setting watch for any sign of Greyjoy ships crossing the sea. Ned braced himself, sensing that the precarious peace might soon be tested. Even so, the Ironborn threat did not compare to the scale of the rebellion. Robert believed crushing the Greyjoys would be swift and decisive, should it come to that. In the midst of these rumblings, Ned's family life blossomed. Catelyn bore him more children. Sansa, then Arya, each child bringing their own spark of joy into the halls of Winterfell. The North grew to love the gentle Tully woman who smiled at them from the ramparts, who rode through the snow-laden forests to greet harvesters, and who prayed to the Seven in a small sept she had arranged near the keep. The old gods still held dominion in the north, but the people respected her piety, and Ned quietly built her a small place of worship so she would never feel alone among the nameless gods of the weirwood. Amid these domestic changes, the uneasy undercurrent of the realm endured. The Lannisters grew wealthier and more powerful with each passing tournament, each commercial venture. Tywin Lannister's men were said to be rearming at Casterly Rock in large numbers, though no open threat existed. Some suggested he merely wished to project strength, ensuring no house dared challenge his new position as father-in-law to the king. Others believed Tywin still seethed at the slight from the Mad King years ago and would never rest until the whole realm acknowledged Lannister supremacy. Ned paid attention to the ravens from the west, unsure what Tywin might do if challenged. As the children of House Stark grew, Ned found his nights sometimes haunted by ghosts of the war. In his dreams, he saw King's Landing wreathed in green flames, Rhaegar pinned to a marble floor as Robert swung his warhammer. Then the scene would shift, and Ned would be in the crypts of Winterfell, listening to the dead whisper accusations that he had betrayed his friend, or that he had failed to protect his sister. He would wake, heart pounding, sweat beading on his brow despite the cold. Often, Catelyn would stir beside him and ask what troubled him. He never gave voice to the deeper fears. He only said, "Memories of the war," and she would place a reassuring hand on his shoulder until he calmed. During the second year of Robert's reign, a raven arrived bearing the king's seal. Robert invited, some said summoned, Ned to King's Landing for a great tourney to celebrate the naming of a new hand of the king. Jon Arryn, who had served as hand since the rebellion, had expressed a wish to step aside. Some believed Jon's health was failing. Others whispered that he was tired of trying to reign in Robert's excesses. Whoever the reason, the king decided to host an extravagant tourney in the capital, presumably financed again by Lannister gold. Ned considered refusing, for he had no desire to wade back into the swirl of southern politics. But Catelyn urged him to attend. She said it would be wise to show House Stark's continued loyalty to the crown, and the children might benefit from seeing the wider realm if he chose to bring them. Reluctantly, Ned agreed. He set off with a small retinue that included some of his loyal guard, as well as the newly appointed captain of Winterfell's household guard, Jory Castle. He left Catelyn behind with baby Arya, not wishing to risk a child so young on the road, but he took Sansa and Robb. They were old enough to marvel at the spectacle, and Sansa had been pining for the chance to see a tourney in the flesh, having heard so many songs about gallant knights and the feats of arms. The journey south was long, reminiscent of the old days when Ned had first marched to join the rebellion, though this time the pace was slower, less desperate. Through the riverlands they rode, and he took the opportunity to stop briefly at Riverrun, introducing Robb and Sansa to their Tully kin. Lord Hoster, Catelyn's father, doted on his grandchildren, albeit in failing health. The children found the riverlands enchanting, with golden fields of wheat shimmering under the sun. Sansa, in particular, was delighted by the colorful pageantry of local fairs, while Robb, more serious, asked Ned pointed questions about the men practicing archery along the castle walls. When they arrived at King's Landing, the city was much the same, though the evidence of the war's final battle was less apparent. Many of the burned-out structures had been repaired or replaced, financed by the crown. Outside the gate, merchants touted their wares, and inside the walls, throngs of people bustled with excitement at the prospect of a lavish tourney. Banners of the crowned stag fluttered side by side with the golden lion of Lannister. Spying the latter, Ned suppressed a sigh. King's Landing now was as much Lannister territory as Baratheon. Robert greeted Ned with boisterous warmth, gathering him in a hug that almost lifted the slimmer northerner off his feet. "Ned," he roared, stepping back to look at the children. "And these must be the young wolves, eh? Growing fast, I see. Gods, how time flies." He was in the great hall, dressed in furs dyed deep crimson, a color that clashed oddly with his house colors but seemed to echo the presence of the Lannisters at court. Beside him stood Cersei, her golden hair piled atop her head, green eyes studying Ned's children with polite detachment. At her side were Prince Joffrey and little Myrcella, who looked at Sansa with curious smiles. Ned bowed, urging Sansa and Robb to do the same. "Your Grace," Ned said formally. Despite the warmth in Robert's voice, there was an invisible line between them now, a faint tension that had not existed when they were young wards together at the Eyrie. Time and war had carved that line. "The North brings you good tidings." Robert dismissed formality with a wave of his hand. "It's a joy to see you. The Hands tourney will be a spectacle to remember. I promise you that." He turned to the children, winking. "You'll see the finest knights in the realm, the best jousters, and perhaps even a melee that'll have you talking for years." Sansa's face lit up. Robb, less prone to open excitement, offered a small smile. Ned politely agreed it would be a grand affair. He noticed, however, that Robert's grin faded quickly once he'd played the role of jovial host. The new king's eyes carried faint shadows, likely from the burdens of rule or from indulging too often in wine. As the days led up to the tourney, Ned found himself quickly reminded of why he disliked courtly life. Intrigues abounded. Lords from across Westeros arrived in their finest regalia, hosting feasts and forging alliances in clandestine corners. Rumors flew. Tywin Lannister planned to marry off his youngest children to powerful houses. Stannis Baratheon was feuding with the king's small council over shipping rights, and rumors about Rhaegar Targaryen's whereabouts popped up now and again, sparking hushed speculation. Some insisted the exiled prince was dead. Others declared he bided his time in Pentos under the protection of magisters. A few said he had joined a mercenary company, desperate to earn gold for a theoretical future claim. Ned tried to ignore such gossip, but courtiers pressed him for his opinion. The memory of his betrayal, some called it mercy, some called it a crime, still lingered in many minds. Did Eddard Stark still harbor any sympathy for the Targaryens? Ned would simply say, "The Targaryens are exiled. The war is over," refusing to fuel the rumor mill. But in the back of his mind, he recalled the pained look on Rhaegar's face when the prince had surrendered to Robert. If the man was alive, was he truly content to wander Essos, or was he plotting to return? Ned had no answer, only the knowledge that Robert's vengeance would be swift if the Targaryens did set foot on Westerosi shores. The tourney itself was indeed grand. A new hand had been selected, Ser Roland Craighall, a decent soldier but no great statesman. Robert used the event to dazzle the realm, ensuring that lords traveled home singing songs of a splendid court. Knights from the Vale, the Reach, and beyond came to compete. Ser Jaime Lannister, already renowned for killing the Mad King, a deed that some praised, some condemned, competed in the jousts with gold armor that gleamed in the sun. And to Ned's surprise, Ser Barristan Selmy also participated in the lists. Barristan had returned to King's Landing a year after escorting Rhaegar into exile, fulfilling his vow that he would serve the crown as long as he was able. Barristan seldom spoke of that journey, nor the man he had once protected. But the hush that fell around him whenever he entered a hall spoke volumes. People knew he had guarded the Targaryen heir, and yet King Robert permitted him to retain the White Cloak. That alone was evidence of how complicated Robert's mercy, or Ned's involvement, had made everything. On the first day of the jousting, Sansa sat in the stands with other highborn ladies, watching with rapt attention. Robert presided from a dais, laughing as lances splintered. Ned remained near the king, somewhat ill at ease among the swirl of courtiers, but mindful of his children's awe. Robb especially admired the skill of the riders, though he eyed them with a budding warrior's reserve. Jory Castle and the other Northmen stood behind Ned, noting the spectacle with quiet stoicism. After a series of lesser knights were unhorsed, Ser Jaime Lannister took the field, his cloak of white swirling, the Lion of House Lannister bright on his shield. He faced Ser Barristan. The crowd held its breath. Here was the Kingslayer jousting the greatest living knight in the realm, a man who had once worn the Targaryen sigil proudly. At the sound of the trumpet, they charged. Sansa gasped. Two lances met in a furious collision of splinters and force. Barristan kept his seat, but Jaime slid backward on his horse, nearly toppled. The tilt was declared for Barristan. Robert roared with approval, always appreciative of a good show. Jaime rose in the stirrups, shaking his head in disbelief, then saluted Barristan grudgingly. "You see," Robert said to Ned, voice booming. "Barristan might be getting older, but he's still as fine a knight as any in this realm. Glad to have him on our side, eh?" Ned simply inclined his head. He wondered if Robert recalled how close Barristan had been to Rhaegar. Perhaps time had dulled Robert's suspicions, or perhaps Robert accepted that Barristan was an honorable knight who ultimately served the throne, regardless of who sat on it. After the jousts, there was a grand feast in the Red Keep, with music and dancing. Sansa was invited to dance with Prince Joffrey, a courtesy that made the girl's cheeks flush with excitement. Robb, uninterested in dancing, quietly stood with Ned, sampling food from the long tables stacked with roast boar, pheasant, and sweet pastries. Robert was in high spirits, flanked by Cersei and an endless flow of wine. Tywin Lannister was absent, though some lesser Lannisters mingled, presumably watching on their lord's behalf. The chatter rose to a dull roar, occasionally broken by a bard's song. Ned found himself cornered by Lord Varys, the master of whisperers, who greeted him with a soft, simpering smile. "My Lord Stark," Varys purred. "I trust the North as well. What a pleasure to see you at court again, especially now that the realm is at peace." "The North is well," Ned said, guarded as always with the spymaster. "We labor to keep it that way." "Indeed, indeed," Varys said, folding his hands into voluminous lavender sleeves. "One hears so many things in the Red Keep, my lord. Whispers, flights of fancy. Some say there is friction in the stepstones. Others say the Greyjoys plan something rash. The king, of course, remains unconcerned. And why should he be, with men like you to guard the realm? If only we had your presence here more often." Ned frowned. "I serve my king from Winterfell. That is enough." Varys bowed his head deferentially, the picture of ingratiation. "Oh, I do not question your loyalty, merely observing that it might set minds at ease if the realm's most honorable lord were closer at hand, especially given the complicated legacies of recent events." He paused, letting the remark linger, clearly alluding to Ned's role in sparing Rhaegar. "We wouldn't want any old dragons stirring from slumber, would we?" Ned's jaw tightened. "If you have something to say it plainly." But Varys only gave a polite laugh. "Why, I'm only pointing out that rumors persist, my lord. One never knows who might seize upon them." Their conversation was interrupted when Robert's voice boomed across the hall, commanding everyone's attention for a toast. Ned stepped away from the spymaster, unsettled but not surprised. He downed his wine with little relish, longing for the clarity of northern air. Soon enough, the festivities concluded. Ned excused himself, taking the children back to their chambers. On the way, they passed a corridor leading to the courtyard. There, by the flickering light of torches, Ned spied Ser Barristan alone, removing his gauntlets. The older knight caught sight of Ned and inclined his head politely. Ned left Robb and Sansa with Jory, then stepped aside to greet Barristan quietly. "You still have your skill at the joust," Ned remarked in a subdued tone. "You unseated Jaime Lannister cleanly." Barristan shrugged, looking faintly weary. "The Kingslayer is formidable, but perhaps he had too much confidence." After a moment of silence, the older knight lowered his voice. "How fares the North, Lord Stark? And how fare your dreams? I imagine they must be like my own sometimes." Haunted by the memory of that day in the throne room, Ned studied Barristan's face, seeing compassion and old scars alike. "We did what we had to," Ned said. "The city still stands because of it." Barristan nodded. "The city stands, yes. Many thousands who might have burned are alive. Yet so many died anyway. Rhaenys, Princess Elia." His voice trailed off. "And now the realm tries to move on without truly mending old wounds. I only hope we do not pay for it later." Ned did not reply. They exchanged a final nod and parted ways. The next morning, Ned discovered that Ser Barristan had been asked by Robert to serve as the final judge in the melee. The hands tourney continued, day after day of martial displays. Ned endured it with patience, aware that soon he would be free to return north. Yet the sense that something deeper lurked beneath the gaiety troubled him. Perhaps the knowledge that if war did come again, it would not take the same shape as the rebellion. The lords and ladies present at the tourney seemed fixated on appearances, forging alliances and feeding rumors. The realm had grown restless in peacetime, it seemed, or perhaps had always been restless. Eventually, the day came for Ned to bid farewell. He turned down Robert's invitation to extend his stay, pleading obligations at Winterfell. Robert huffed, but he could not deny Ned's right to leave. So Ned, along with Sansa and Robb, left the capital in a smaller procession than they had arrived. The children were filled with stories of knights and ladies. Sansa, wide-eyed, recounted every joust she had witnessed, praising the gallantry of men like Ser Loras Tyrell. Robb, older than his sister by a couple of years, occasionally teased her about wanting to be a southern lady. Ned watched them both, feeling that small pang of fatherly guilt. He wanted them to see the realm, but he also knew how dangerous it could be to become enamored of southern splendor. The North was simpler, yes, but also more honest in many ways. The journey was halfway complete when they paused at an inn not far from Harrenhal. Night had fallen, and the children were tired from riding. In the common room, Ned quietly sipped ale while Jory Castle arranged for their rooms. A few locals mingled at the tables, discussing the usual fare of local gossip. Disputes over farmland, a sighting of a monstrous boar in the forest, the rising cost of bread. Ned's mind wandered until a passing remark about dragon spawn pricked his ears. He turned, focusing on a pair of travelers speaking in low tones at a corner table. One was a scarred man with the look of a sellsword, the other a wiry merchant. The sellsword muttered, "I tell you, I saw a Targaryen. Maybe not the prince, but that hair. Can't mistake it. They're stirring again in Essos. Word is, the Golden Company might be sniffing around for a new cause." The merchant snorted. "Hogwash, Rhaegar's dead. Or if he's not, he might as well be. The Golden Company's got its own business. But I'll grant you, there are rumors of some Targaryen brats across the sea. If it's not Rhaegar, it's that boy Viserys, or the babe Daenerys. They'll never cross into Westeros. Not with King Robert's wrath waiting." Still, the sellsword insisted, A Targaryen might muster support in certain free cities. People say the rightful king. At that point, the innkeeper bustled over to hush them, casting a nervous glance at Ned's table, no doubt recognizing the sigil on the cloak of one of Ned's men. The conversation ended abruptly. Ned pretended not to have overheard, but something twisted in his gut. He had no taste for Targaryen rumors, but they continued to follow him like a dark shadow. Ned and his party reached Winterfell without further incident. Catelyn greeted them with relief, and Arya threw her small arms around Ned's waist. The snows would come soon, another winter on the horizon. Winterfell stewards began storing grain and salted meats, the rhythms of the north turning once more. Ned settled back into his lordly duties, determined to put the capital's intrigues behind him. But the realm would not remain quiet. Within a year of the tourney, Balon Greyjoy declared himself king of the Iron Islands and rose in open rebellion. The Ironborn raided the western coasts, sacking small towns, burning ships. Robert called his banners once again. Yet this time, the conflict lacked the moral fervor of the rebellion. It was a short, sharp war of subjugation, a king asserting his crown's authority over a rebellious vassal. Robert led the main force, accompanied by Ned and other great lords. Stannis commanded the royal fleet, crushing the Ironborn at sea. The final blow fell when the combined might of the North and the Crownlands stormed Pike. Balon's eldest sons perished in the fight, and the Greyjoy cause collapsed. Balon bent the knee a broken man. In the aftermath, Robert took the last living son of Balon Greyjoy, young Theon, as a hostage and ward. Ned argued for mercy where the boy was concerned, at least in the sense that the child should not be harmed for his father's folly. Robert, seeing an opportunity to ensure the Iron Islands' loyalty, agreed to place Theon under Ned's care, effectively as a captive to keep Balon obedient. Ned returned to Winterfell with Theon in tow, an uneasy solution. He did not relish holding a child hostage, but it was the only means to prevent further rebellion from the Iron Islands. The years crawled forward. Robert's reign stabilized again after the Greyjoy rebellion, though the cost in lives had been steep. Nobles from across the realm now understood that King Robert would not hesitate to assert his will, no matter how chivalrous or complacent he sometimes seemed. The North, for its part, saw Ned remain a cautious participant in the Crown's campaigns, loyal yet ever watchful that Robert did not repeat the atrocities that had stained the sack of King's Landing. Ned had done enough to keep peace with the king. He marched, he fought, and he returned to the north with no illusions about how precarious the realm's calm truly was. Meanwhile, Theon Greyjoy grew up alongside Robb, sharing in the training in Winterfell's yard. He was a foster brother of sorts to the young wolves, though never quite one of them. Robb treated Theon well enough, but the boy carried a certain swagger and brashness that set him apart. He boasted of the sea, of the iron-born ways, even as he struggled to find his place among northerners who worshipped the old gods and took pride in their harsh land. As time marched on, more children filled Winterfell's halls. Bran, Rickon, and one day Catelyn discovered she was with child yet again. Each child added a measure of life to the old fortress, though Ned's solemn demeanor remained. He dutifully fathered them, taught them what honor meant in the north, and recounted the stark realities of ruling. But never did he mention in detail the circumstances of Robert's rebellion. He rarely spoke of Rhaegar Targaryen, nor of the ghosts that lingered from that time, though sometimes he would find himself staring into the heart tree in the Godswood, lips moving as if in silent prayer for the realm's future. Years passed like pages turning in a grand chronicle of the Seven Kingdoms. Robert fathered bastards across the realm, indulged in feasting and hunts. Tywin Lannister remained at Casterly Rock, quietly amassing wealth and forging alliances through marriages. The Martells of Dorne still nursed their wounds, simmering at the memory of Elia and Rhaenys, but for the moment, their wrath found no open outlet. The Targaryens, if they indeed survived, stayed across the narrow sea. Some in Westeros dismissed them as ghosts. Others, more astute, suspected that the exiled royals merely waited for an opportunity. In King's Landing, the small council turned over as men came and went. Pycelle endured, Varys whispered, and Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, grew in influence, managing the crown's coin and weaving new webs of finance and favor. Cersei and Robert's marriage soured over the years, so the rumor mill said, but they maintained appearances in public. Prince Joffrey was shaping into a proud, petulant boy who idolized his father's feats in battle, ignoring the complexities that had led to the rebellion. Myrcella and Tommen were younger, more amiable, overshadowed by T. "There you are, Ned," Robert said. "I was about to mount a search party. Gods, you take your time." He embraced Ned roughly, then clapped eyes on the girls. "Ah, sweet little wolves." He gave them a paternal grin, though there was an edge to his eyes, as though he had something more pressing on his mind. Ned noted that Cersei was not in the courtyard to greet them, nor did he see many other members of the royal household. Only a handful of gold cloaks and a few lesser courtiers lingered near, all looking tense. That alone told Ned the atmosphere in the castle was not that of celebration. He returned Robert's greeting with a half-smile. "My king, I came as swiftly as I could. My condolences on Jon Arryn." Robert's expression darkened at the mention of his former hand. Yes, he muttered. "That business is complicated. But you are here now. I'll speak with you privately. The girls will be shown to their chambers." Ned nodded, giving the children a reassuring nod as a steward led them away. He felt their anxiety, Sansa's confusion, Arya's restlessness. Soon, Ned followed Robert into a private solar off the Great Hall, the same room where they had once shared wine in the early days of his reign. Memories rushed back. Inside, they were joined by a few men from the small council. Pycelle, looking ancient and owlish. Varys, smiling pleasantly. Peter Baelish, with an irreverent grin. Conspicuously absent was Stannis Baratheon, who had left the capital some time ago, and Renly Baratheon, Robert's younger brother, who was presumably off attending his own amusements. Robert dismissed the courtiers with a wave, wanting to speak with Ned alone. They filtered out, leaving only the two old friends. Robert sighed heavily, pacing the floor as if searching for words. "Jon Arryn is dead," he said again, more quietly. "They say illness, but I don't believe it. He was fine." Then he collapsed, babbling about something. "I suspect foul play, Ned, but I have no proof." He stopped, turning to face Ned with an anguished look. "He was like a father to us. You know that." Ned nodded, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He had loved Jon Arryn like a second father. "Have you any leads?" Robert ran a hand over his face. "Some, but I can't trust half the men around me. Cersei. The Lannisters, I don't know. Tywin is at Casterly Rock, but his brood is here in the castle, and I fear they nurse ambitions beyond measure." He paused, then his voice rose with anger. "And then there's the matter of these damned Targaryens across the sea. I hear the girl has wed the Dothraki warlord. If they come for my throne, the realm could bleed again." Jon Arryn was investigating. "Something about that. Something about my lineage or the Targaryens or the Lannisters, I'm not even sure. Now he's dead. I need you, Ned. I need someone I can trust as hand." Ned exhaled, his heart heavy. "I will serve if you command it, your grace. But if you mean to kill that girl..." Robert slammed a fist on the table, causing a carafe of wine to wobble. "I won't have a Targaryen horde pouring into Westeros. I won't. The day I let that happen is the day I pick up my warhammer again. I will kill every last dragonspawn if it keeps my throne secure." Ned's shoulders tensed, old memories of Rhaegar's face flashing in his mind. "Robert, if they come with an army, you have a right to defend your realm. But you must think carefully before sending assassins across the sea. The realm still remembers the murder of children in King's Landing. Do you want that legacy again?" Robert glared. "I want them gone, Ned. Every Targaryen gone. I gave Rhaegar a pass once. No, you forced me to. But I won't let them multiply like rabbits. That boy, Viserys, might as well be a rat scurrying in the shadows. And now the sister is wedded to a savage. If they cross the sea, half the realm might rise for them out of old loyalty or fear. I'll not risk it." Better to cut them down before they have the chance. Ned closed his eyes briefly, recalling the fires in King's Landing. "We are not butchers, Robert. What are we then?" Robert demanded. "You saw what war cost us last time. I'll not do it again if I can help it. Ending them now, quietly, spares thousands." He stepped back, sighing as though deflating. "But enough of that for the moment. You'll be Hand of the King. Help me keep this realm together. If you discover anything about Jon's death who might have done this, tell me. And if the Targaryens show any sign of moving west, we shall deal with it." Ned did not argue further. He had walked this path before, trying to quell Robert's thirst for Targaryen blood. Once more, duty bound him to stand at his friend's side, to attempt to steer the realm away from a darker fate. He accepted the pin of the hand, though it felt heavier than any crown. Thus began Ned's second prolonged stay in King's Landing, no longer just as a guest, but as the Hand of the King, charged with the governance of a kingdom that teetered between the inertia of peace and the looming threat of conflict. The weight of the small council, the swirl of intrigues, and the urgent questions about Jon Arryn's death confronted him at every turn. Meanwhile, across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen stood at the threshold of womanhood and potential conquest, a living embodiment of everything Robert feared. And so the realm that Ned had once saved from wildfire found itself on a new tinderbox. Factions within the Red Keep circled each other like wolves. Some whispered that the Lannisters had killed Jon Arryn to hide a secret. Others suspected Varys or Petyr Baelish. Beneath it all, Ned sensed the old ghost stirring once more. The legacy of House Targaryen, the cruelty of the Mad King, the uncertain fate of Rhaegar, and the half-hidden guilt that Ned carried for having chosen mercy over annihilation. Would that mercy now unleash a new storm upon the realm, or had it merely postponed an inevitable reckoning? Night after night, Ned pored over ledgers, read old scrolls from Jon Arryn's chambers, and tried to piece together the threads of the tapestry Jon had been weaving before his untimely death. The city's heat pressed in, a far cry from the cool breezes of Winterfell. Sansa enjoyed the Queen's company at times, though Cersei's brand of courtesy felt more like a trap than genuine warmth. Arya chafed under the constraints of a southern court, rebelling wherever she could. And Robert grew more distant, more consumed with hunts and drink, leaving Ned to handle the realm's business. As the weeks turned to months, Ned discovered cryptic hints that Jon Arryn had been researching lineage, examining old records of birth and trait inheritance. Names of Baratheon ancestors, Targaryen genealogies, and even the marriages of House Lannister were scribbled in the margins of heavy tomes. Meanwhile, rumors intensified that Daenerys Targaryen was pregnant with Khal Drogo's child. Robert erupted in fury upon hearing that news, claiming it was the final sign that the Targaryens intended to produce a new line of dragon princes. More than once, Robert demanded of his council that an assassin be sent, that the unborn threat be snuffed out. In those heated council sessions, Ned stood nearly alone in opposing such a plan. Grand Maester Pycelle offered vague moral objections but ultimately deferred to the king. Petyr Baelish smirked, suggesting that if it were done discreetly, it might be simpler than waging a war. Varys wrung his hands and offered that the Dothraki might never cross the sea, so perhaps inaction was safer. But Robert's wrath blazed hot, and Ned found himself struggling to restrain a man he had once called brother. When Robert insisted on a vote, Ned refused. "I will not be party to murdering a girl and her unborn child." He removed the hand's pin, placing it on the table. "If that is your decision, do it without me." For a moment, Ned feared that Robert would strike him. The king's face turned purple, and his fist clenched. Then Robert roared a curse and threw a goblet of wine across the chamber, splattering the wall with red. He stormed out, leaving the council in disarray. Ned gathered the pin and left in grim silence, unsure how much longer he could maintain his position if Robert insisted on such monstrous acts. That night, as Ned walked alone on a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay, he wondered if he had made a mistake all those years ago. Perhaps the bloodthirsty men of the realm would never permit any Targaryen to live. Perhaps sparing Rhaegar had sown the seeds for a future war that could devour them all. But the memory of the city nearly aflame under Aerys's order came back to him. He had made that choice out of honor to save innocence. Could honor be a mistake? He had once believed it was the only shield against chaos. Little did he know that events across the sea were moving swiftly. Daenerys Targaryen, pregnant and beloved by her Dothraki Khal, found her situation complicated by her brother's impatience and cruelty. Meanwhile, further from the Dothraki Sea, rumors spread that Rhaegar Targaryen, if he truly lived, had heard of his sister's marriage and was deliberating what role, if any, he might play. The mists of Essos held many secrets, but in the Red Keep, no one could fathom the ripples that might soon cross the narrow sea. In the midst of this, Ned received a secret note one evening, slipped beneath his chamber door. No signature, but the seal pressed into the wax was unmistakable. A dragon in flight. The note read, "She lives and bears the blood of the dragon. Will you let her burn before she draws breath? The sins of the father must not be repeated. Remember the day we saved King's Landing. Remember mercy." Ned's blood went cold. Either this was a cruel jest by some cunning courtier, or it came from someone with knowledge of that dark hour in the throne room. Barristan Selmy? Jaime Lannister? Rhaegar himself? The handwriting was elegant, but unfamiliar. He read it 3 times, heart pounding. The question was pointed. Would Ned stand by this time, or would he intervene again, repeating the choice he had made all those years ago? As the city slept around him, Ned Stark stared at the note by candlelight. He thought of the realm's future, of the unborn child Daenerys carried, of Robert's thirst for dragon blood, and he realized, with a grim twist in his gut, that his betrayal at the end of the rebellion was not a single moment, but a turning point that continued to demand a price. Fate, it seemed, had not finished collecting its due. Outside, the wind off Blackwater Bay carried the faint stench of salt and sewage. Far overhead, the sky shimmered with stars. Somewhere in those stars, Ned imagined, the old gods watched, offering no simple answers. He was once again at a crossroads, where the realm might tilt into savage war or stumble into a tenuous peace. The choice lay before him: hold to the oaths he had sworn the king or remain loyal to the oath within himself, the vow to protect the innocent. In the hush of that midnight, he could only pray that whichever path he chose would not plunge the 7 kingdoms into a darkness that made the rebellion look like a mere prelude. Still clutching the note, Ned drew a breath, reflecting on how it had all begun. The day he spared a wounded prince in a burning city. That choice had saved thousands, yet it also lit embers that might yet spark a blaze. Honor, duty, friendship, and mercy. These forces warred inside him as they once had. And with an unspoken plea to the gods, Ned quietly vowed that even if the realm demanded a butcher, he would stand for something else. He would stand for mercy again if he must, no matter the cost. For Eddard Stark was not a man who could forget the day he saw how easily vengeance turned men into monsters, or how close the realm had come to burning. If it fell to him to make that stand once more, he would do so, even if it meant betraying Robert Baratheon a second time. He snuffed out the candle, set the note aside, and gazed out into the darkness. Somewhere out there, Targaryens old and new were shaping the next chapter of the realm's history. And in the Red Keep, the newly appointed hand of the king did not know if he had the strength to steer the kingdom away from the looming storm. But he knew he would try. The hour was late, and the burdens heavy, but dawn would come, and with it, the consequences of every choice he had made and every choice yet to come.